Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging people leader, thus a leadership enthusiast.
We're doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and opportunities.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. Today, we're talking about the beginning of Season 4, specifically loyalty to a leader, good followership, finding your way in a new environment, and the importance of a team mission. Let's jump in.
So now we're in Season 4. It's 2 years later. And Roberta and Murphy are at Zona. So I'm going to pass it over to you. What were some things in this episode that stood out to you from a leadership and team dynamic perspective?
One of the first things to me was you had Warren and Murphy, who both were, so you had Warren who started out as sort of the group leader. You don't have the group anymore. You had Murphy who had sort of pseudo become this leader within his own group or faction, and now you only have these two leaders working together. I would always make the argument that I think Warren exemplifies a lot better leadership skills than Murphy does. But what I think is interesting is she was in a completely new environment, completely new place, very new parameters, and I think she just listened, right? She was just taking in data. She let Murphy show her around, take the lead. And I thought that was something that's like, I think it's a great leadership skill, because I think a lot of good leaders, when they come into a new place, often don't say a lot of stuff first, right? They just listen because they're the new one in the space. And I think she did a really great job of that. That was like my first big thing was, and I also thought you could tell that from Murphy's perspective, and where I don't think he's the best leader is he loved that, right? Like he was showing her around and like, look at this and look at that, and was playing like the tour guide. And he wasn't really giving her any concrete information, but he was just like, oh yeah, it's a totally safe place. And we play tennis over here and golf over there, and everything's free and it's all great and grand. So it's kind of like a sales pitch and not, are you okay? Right? You've been in a coma for several years or couple years now. He's just like, oh, it's all great. Everything, we won the game. We're great. And so I thought that was like really interesting.
I agree with the Roberta perspective of that yeah, like that is great leadership. She's reeling from, there's a huge time gap that she's missing all this time. She is in a new environment. She's been told that the rest of her team is dead. So she's also processing that. So I think that, yeah, in that time of processing whatever it is, and for whatever reasons you need to do that, it's not a time to, it's a great time to be asking questions, but it's not necessarily the time to be making decisions or making declarations about anything. And I think that so many people forget that time to take in information is really valuable time. And I know I've seen in the corporate world where people don't even have all the information. They just want to jump to this problem solving and this, that, and the other. And it's like, you don't know what the problem is though. You have no idea what success looks like or what support looks like. You're just trying to jump to something to take up the space and maybe claim some sort of control over the situation, when in reality, doing what Warren did here, which is, what is this? And let me get in all the information I can. That is a really great leadership skill. I agree.
Yeah. No, so that was my first sort of big takeaway. What was yours?
That was a big one for me too. I really viewed Murphy too in that as, I guess for me, it was like less sales pitchy. And I think that he was in a place where in his mind, he always wanted to be, as far as how he was treated and the type of lifestyle it was. And so I think that was exciting for him. And he was trying to highlight that and not the pieces that would inherently be important to Roberta. Roberta does not care about tennis. Roberta does not care about all of that type of thing. But yeah, so I think that he was really highlighting the things that were important, that were valuable to him. So I thought that that was really interesting. The biggest thing for me from this episode was the founder. So we've kind of seen the hand before or whatever, and the founder, his whole thing is basically like save the rich people at the expense of anyone else, right? Like that was all he cared about. And I thought that that was so interesting because I think that sometimes people who run companies or just sometimes people, they get so focused on what they think is the most important thing that it becomes this exercise in whatever it takes and at any cost. And it's like, no, absolutely not. That is wild. Like at any cost or whatever it takes is usually to the detriment of someone, right? Or of a large group of people. And I think that Margaret Atwood, she said it in the book, The Handmaid's Tale, where she said, better isn't better for everyone. It's only better for some. It's worse for everyone else. And I think that that was the thing where it's like everybody sees him as this founder, this great architect of this, of Zona and of this lifestyle. And so in that regard, he has that position of authority, of leadership, but like how we got there and even just the whole premise behind it is, of course, not leadership at all.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The better for some and not better for all, I think is really interesting too, because he's highlighted a certain group of people, and what I think is interesting too is you have the soldiers and the support staff and everyone else that like came along for that, but like those numbers are drastically disproportional to what is like an accurate representation. So it's he's an interesting guy, I think, to say the least, as far as being so absorbed into one singular goal at any cost. And yeah, I think you're right that's can be super detrimental. I hadn't even looked at that part as that. I was just, oh, he's a crazy guy, but I hadn't really even looked at the like social ramifications for what he was ultimately saying. Who was truly valuable as a human and who wasn't, which is kind of messed up now that I think about it. But
yeah, well, and I think we have that even in our current society, right? Where we have people who don't get paid a living wage and they have to work several jobs, and maybe their children are not as well cared for and, have to be on their own a lot more than other people. And then we as a society blame them for whatever choices we perceive them as having made, when really this is how society runs. There are people who have decided that they're going to hoard as much money and as much resources as possible, even though they don't need them and they're not going to use them, even if they were to use a ton of stuff every day for the rest of their lives. And in doing that, then it is preventing, it's just taking care of this very small minority and not actually caring about society. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to give up all their money to everyone else, but I am saying that there are definitely situations, many situations where when someone is unable to, like they're working hard at this job, they're working 40 hours a week and they can't take care of the basic needs of their family, then we have something very disproportionate there. So it really is about not, like I said, not divvying it all up, but it is about how do we care for everyone in the system to make sure that we're all moving forward and not just worried about this group who, not even based on merit. It's not based on merit at all, right? It's just based on this arbitrary thing that's either money or resources.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. I think something else that really stuck out to me with this episode too was, so you had these like cuts into like the other like members of Bitemark, Operation Bitemark, and with some exception, they're all doing their own thing now. They've, you know what I mean? Like the only one, like they all got along for the most part, were friendly, but it was the mission that bound them together. That's why they all stuck together. And when Warren sort of left and Murphy, who was ultimately the mission, like we've talked about time and time again, they all sort of disbanded and are still friendly. And I saw that through a couple of different things. One, the importance of understanding goals and how you can really get a team to form bond over like having clear, concise, objectives.
Mhm.
But the other thing, I laughed to myself because I think I made that joke to you. You know, people from work wanting to get out, and ew, we're work people. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to hang out with you. On off time, right? It's been 8 hours with you every day. We don't need more time. Um, but yeah, I really did think that was interesting because they sort of ran into each other and got caught up, and but there was also like they were on a very high performing team, and as they reminisced, there's like almost longing in that reminiscing, right? Remember the good old days when we all used to do this thing, and so again, I just saw that as the power from a leadership perspective, Warren being very clear, and I think we get a different side of Warren as we move forward. But like she's very clear about what the goals were. She communicated that with everyone. They moved through very effectively. We're a very high performing team, and now they want that back again. And so, I really unpacked that about as a leader within my organization, retention, right? Keeping people around is something that's very important. Oftentimes we try to do that by maximizing like monetary compensation, but then I realizing it's a TV show, but like look at that. There was no monetary compensation for that team, and they all stuck together because they had very clear goals and had that strong leadership. So I think that was something that really stuck out to me is could be a way you can keep people within the organization.
And I think that there's an amount of reflecting too, where they were on this really high performing team where they trusted each other, they were learning from each other, they cared about each other. And we're not always on teams like that. And that's not always the situation. So how do we remedy that in our lives? Like sometimes you can be working with great people and it just doesn't click. You're just still like, it's fine. We're all performing, but I feel like sometimes there are just those teams that we're on where it was like, remember that? Like, remember how much we got done and how effective we were. But then there comes this piece where I think people need to reflect on where it's like, am I then just going to be chasing that? And if I compare the people that I work with now to something like that, it's also in our brain, it's way better than it ever actually was. Right. So it's like, I could try to say, oh yeah, I was on this great team and these people just don't stack up. Maybe they don't, and that's true, but also maybe it's just that in my mind, that was the best team I was ever on, and nobody's ever going to be able to compare that.
Yeah. But now you got me now you got me reminiscing. You got me looking back. But no. So those are the big things for that episode for me, I think. Those are the two big ones. Did you have anything else from those two or from that episode?
I don't, but at the end of that episode, Roberta is realizing that this is not where I want to be. And what I love about that is then going into the next episode where they're now trying to escape from Zona. It's that whole piece of I'm in this place, I'm in this job, I'm in this company, and there's something about it that is not sitting well with me. And sometimes I think that there's this values mismatch that we're like, I can't tell you why this isn't right. We can in this scenario, because obviously people in Zona are monsters. But sometimes we're in a job or we're in a place where it's like, I can't explain why this isn't good. And I don't know how to quantify it, but I need to not be here. And I think that we don't put enough weight into it's a values mismatch for what I believe is important and what this company believes is important. At the end of the day, are we aligned on that? And it's not saying that you as kind of just a general employee get an opportunity to change the vision or the mission of the organization. But sometimes you hear things and we, have these espoused values. And then in reality, we're like, oh, that's not how it works at all. And this is like a bit of a farce, essentially. And I can't do this anymore. And so I think as I was just watching kind of the end of episode 1 of season 4 and then going into episode 2, I saw that pull in Roberta where it's a very physical manifestation of, I got to get out of here. And so I think going into the next episode, that was something that really stood out for me. Was it was her essentially finding her footing again as a leader and being like, this is the next right thing.
Yeah, no, and it's a great point because she observed, right? Like we said, she was quiet, she observed, she took everything in. Then, I think you said, I think she realized very quickly that it didn't feel right. Continue to observe, right? Double check, right? Is this really not feel right, or is this just a thing for me? And then, I I thought was really funny was Murphy was kind of the complete opposite, right? And would refuse to accept its failings. And what was interesting because it was twofold. Like you said, one, it was his perfect utopia, and then two, it was supposed to be a perfect utopia because of his blood, right? The vaccine made from him. So Zona's failing was his failing, and I think that was a shot at the ego, and I also think that was a shot at um if like if these people aren't invincible and they're supposed to be because of me, maybe I'm not that invincible either. As his own mortality was kind of looking him back in the face. And I just, like I said, I think that that's sometimes you got to push through I've done it myself, implementing new processes or something like that I've maybe come up with or observed, and there's always growing pains, and you're like, oh, we just got to push through it a little bit longer, and like 2 years later, it still doesn't work. You're like, just a little more, just like a few more weeks, months, years, right? And then this is going to be great. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. So you don't want to give up. So I was the Murphy sympathizer on that one, but for my own vanity.
No, but I appreciate that perspective because I hadn't really thought about it from that angle of there's like, I have a huge stake in this. And you definitely see people who hold on for too long or defend something where you're like, don't fall on your sword for this. Of all the things you could fall on your sword for, don't let it be this. Like, you can move on. You've built something before, you can build again in a different, you just maybe need a different environment, just different team, whatever. And so, yeah, I definitely see that perspective because, yeah, he contributed to that. It was this perfect place. He was so excited when he was showing Roberta around talking about all this stuff. And now they're like, Roberta's like, we got to get out of here. And he's just like, no, I don't want that. And also to think about going back to things before. And I think that that's also something that as leaders and as professionals, we are consistently, I should say, trying to become better, to have more, right? Whether that's more experience, whether that's more money, whatever that more is for each person. And then just the threat of, I know I survived before without this. I don't want to though, right? I don't want to. I like where I'm at. I feel like, and I think some people like get stuck in this thing where it's like, oh, career progression always has to be linear. And I think that's why they get stuck in it. They view it like, if I go back, it's maybe a failure, but it's also like, I remember what it's like to struggle there, and I don't want to struggle like that again. I feel like I'm done struggling in that way. When in reality, we have additional experience. We have all these additional things that will make that a different type of struggle, if it's even a struggle at all.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And because similarly to that point, I think when it comes to like having a goal and assessing it and knowing when it's time to move on and rebuild, you really, when you said that earlier, that kind of struck a chord with me, because I think one of the things that I've started to learn and place a much higher emphasis on from like like part, like that management leadership style, part of that management and a leader, I'll say visionary, not a visionary, but right, like that whole, you got a good idea, right? As having an idea, I think the documentation and the tracking and really fleshing out, even if it's at like that 80,000 foot view, this is what I'm hoping to accomplish with this, and then documenting as you go through that process. Is it contributing to getting to whatever that big heady goal was? And if not, right, is it, do you stop, do you reassess? But like that documentation piece, I used to be terrible about writing things down or sharing the think is like, I didn't want somebody to come in and micromanage or try to change it or anything like that. Maybe it needs to, right? And especially if you can get your big end state goals out there first, um, it, people don't often change the big; they change the little. Like that's what I've come to learn. You know what I mean? So it's like, at least in my organization. So yeah, the documentation and the writing things down and being able to be fluid and accepting it. Like it was great once, it's not great anymore. The old way isn't always going to be the best way. You got to move on and move forward. I think that's pretty interesting.
And just with that too, the rate that we do need to adapt. I'm a big fan of documentation, whether that's through planners or journals or official like digital documentation things, because it is, how did we get here? Is there something broken in this process? And I do want other people to look at it because they're going to see something that you don't see, of course. But the other thing too, is I think it can also be a reminder that, again, I built this, I can build something else. Because just because you lose something big and important that you put a lot of effort, put a lot of your emotional resources and mental resources into, you've done it before, you can do it again. It's not the most ideal scenario, but that openness to what could be adapted for this, for the ever adapting professional landscape, right? Like these things need to change and I need to change. You don't want to be like the blockbusters, no offense, Blockbuster, of, oh, this new streaming thing that's never going to take off. And then you're like, you did build something and it was great, right? We all still know those buildings when we pass by them, abandoned buildings, but it's really important to be like, but what is next? What could be next? And what risks can I take? And when you have this really good documentation, you have this really good process already in place, we don't need to reinvent the whole thing. We can just look at which of these parts could be substituted out. And I think that also can make people, not only the people who are leading it, but people in the process, you're not saying we're completely pivoting and changing everything. We're going to change these 2 steps out of 8 steps. And here's why. And people can handle that a lot better, especially when they can see the process and see the documentation. So I'm with you as far as like that type of stuff being just super important. And in this scenario, Murphy does not have that. He has there are no receipts for Murphy's effectiveness. And so, but there are for Roberta, right? So Roberta is able to, she also has that confidence of, I can leave this, it's going to be fine. This isn't a values match for me. It's going to be fine because she has that confidence, but she also has that proven record of, I know how to get through things. I'm resilient and I'm a good leader.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Because the other thing that I think is interesting, do you have anything more on that part of the episode? Yeah, because I think it was also, you had the team, right? There was a zombie that kind of showed up that was like this, there's caused issues because you had the group that sort of splintered and split up a little bit, and they were sort of in conflict with each other without really knowing about it too much. And I thought that was really interesting too, because it was just these high performers that used to work so well together that are now on sort of opposing teams. And they don't even realize that yet. And I thought that was very, very telling, of like, they used to work really, really well together. They were split up by circumstances, and now they're equally matched for skill. So trying to put them against each other, you're going to make no progress, right? Nobody's going to beat beat in this situation is appropriate, but like neither of them are going to be able to beat each other because they're so equally matched in that skill. So it's like, how do you rechannel that to drive it to make it work together, because their goal is still the same, right? Stay alive. So I thought that was really interesting to me, is you had high performers in conflict, which was not moving the needle at all, right? It was stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
So
with this, did you have anything else from this episode?
No.
Okay. So with this, Murphy and Roberta do leave Zona. And so we get into this new place where at the beginning of the season, Roberta's taking in new information, and now they're both in a position where maybe things that they were told are not accurate. There's all this sort of stuff. So as they're leaving Zona, Dr. Teller tells them, Lucy's alive. Like these other people that we told you were dead, that's not true. So again, we have this place of that reeling from what you thought the truth was, something that you've already processed, and then that not being true. And I think there's also a mental thing there where you're like, can I believe this next thing? Right. And I think that a lot of times when we don't take the time to process as leaders and as just as people, that can get us stuck. But I'll turn it over to you. So in episode 3, The Vanishing, what stood out to you?
So I'm just trying to think chronologically. I think it was a little later on, right? There's a lot of stuff in the beginning. There's a lot, but I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the group all got back together at that outpost, right? A little bit by circumstance, a little bit because it's a TV show, but they were all back together, and a lot had changed. A lot of years had passed, right? So they sort of fell in, said their hellos, missed you, what's been up, type deal. But then they run into a situation where they're faced with what is normally a very bread and butter issue for the team, right? A zombie needs to be mercied. And the zombie that's there happens to be someone who some of the group used to know as a human. That's difficult. They've dealt with that in the past many times. It's kind of old hat. But this zombie is kind of almost mercy proof. And what I thought was really interesting about that was how that change shook the team to its core, right? Everyone would attempt to mercy the zombie. Their tried and true method for mercying a zombie didn't work, and they froze. And then that next team member would come in with their way, and it did not work, and they froze. So that core competency of mercying zombies and then working together as a team, and we talked about that for this whole kind of series, how that's sort of that key tenet of what that team could do. That does not work on this particular zombie, and they do not have a next plan because it's such, to them, a fundamental base of what's true. And I just thought that was like so interesting because they tried to rally back. They were kind of trying to communicate again. They were still very much in that forming phase again, right? All brand new experiences coming in. And I think they're like, that's something you can anchor on. Everybody knows how to use Microsoft Word on the team, and then Microsoft does an update and they move where a button is, and all of a sudden the whole office is failing, right? Like it's the end of the world and nothing's ever gonna work again. And so I thought that was really, to see with a zombie is funny. I think it's also funny that I've seen that happen with a software update as well. You know what I mean? With a team. So that I thought was really, really interesting.
It just goes to show that the environment adapts and it changes in ways that we are not expecting. So the skills that we have now are good for now, but we always need to be looking towards what's that next thing. And essentially, how do you mentally prepare yourself to not know, to work at ambiguity? I know a lot of people, they're always like, how do you lead in ambiguity? How do you do these different? That's life. It's called being alive, right? We don't know these next things, these next challenges. So really it's about how much do you trust yourself to solve a problem? That's really what it is. And I think that a lot of people don't trust themselves to solve problems. And that's where they get into these things where it's like, I tried this. And like you said, they kind of tried it and they froze. And it's like, well, keep trying something else. Right. And so, yeah, I think you brought up a really good point there.
Yeah, that stuck out to me. Like I said, that was a little bit later on in the episode. And what's your next point? Because mine is almost pretty much exactly at the end. Is my other big one.
In this episode, we also get to meet Sergeant Lily, who, what I like about her character is that she is a phenomenal follower. And we've talked about followership in the past. And what I like about her followership, even in this episode, is it kind of goes along, and I think we've also talked about this too, the concept within impact players, where it's like step up into a situation, meet the moment, and be a leader, but then step back. And I think she does that well, even within this episode. And I mean, she'll continue to do that. But pardon me, but we get to meet her, she's promoted to sergeant, but then it's her lieutenant who is somebody that she knew who becomes one of these unkillable zombies. And
Unmerciable.
Unmerciable. Yeah, because they are in fact already dead. So but with that, it's just interesting how she also realized, like, what is my responsibility here? Let me step up and meet this moment. So what I really like about her is she's such a good follower, and good followers make good leaders, typically.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that the like the perseverance and the strength, like you said, cat, stop jumping on my desk. The perseverance and stuff that you'd said, like in the face of having to mercy someone she knew, also a leader, right, who she respected a lot. It was sort of this very, very aggressive passing of the torch, almost. And so, like you said, I think she was a very powerful person in that instance and in that moment. And I think sort of to that, I thought that was so the team's all there. Warren is now, I don't know if we mentioned like how she's having the visions, so to speak, right? She breaks away. She's having these visions. Nobody can see what's going on in her head. And at this point in the team, what I think is really interesting is they've sort of identified they had this really big challenge in this unmerciable zombie, and things are different. But they enjoyed all working together again, right? They were happy to be together, even with these new challenges. More strength in the group than as my own person. Excuse me. And they Warren starts to go off in her own direction, right? In fact, the complete opposite direction of where the group had sort of come to this democratic decision of where they needed to head to, which I think is New America or the remaining government or something like that. Warren starts walking complete opposite direction. Everyone starts to follow her anyway. And Doc says this line where he's like, "You know me, man. I don't like when we split up." So, and I think he says that to Murphy, who's like, "Oh nope, there's safety. We can get back to this thing like we had in Zona. Apparently, closer to it over here. We should go that way." Warren's going her own direction. The entire team follows her, and then even Murphy, because he's just going to go with the group, safety in numbers. But I thought that was really, really powerful because nobody knew why she was going in that direction because it was all in her head. It was a vision she was following. Everyone's like, nope, we'll go with her. So,
even she didn't know.
Yeah.
She had no idea why she was going that way. And even Lily, new to the team, sees that Warren is a leader and it's like, yeah, I'll follow this person too. Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting and just powerful moment for the group.
Yeah. So that was, like I said, that was like towards the end of the episode, but that was huge to me because when you talk about like building up equity in people, right? Like she wasn't asking a favor or anything. She just did right by them so often that now the belief will be that she's going to do right by them again. And I think that, it doesn't have to be leadership doesn't have to be quid pro quo. It can just be you do the right thing consistently. And then that's what you're going to be known for. And people are going to do a more difficult thing for you or with you, not because you have to give them something in return, but because they know you've proven time and time again that it's within the best interest of the group. And so I think that was really, really powerful. Good reminder.
And I think another thing that I like about Warren is she's definitely a lead from the front person, but she's not this charismatic, rah type of leader. No. Very subtle in a lot of ways. And I think that that's also something really important. People always think, oh, you follow this person. They're so charismatic. They're so enthusiastic about this thing. But like you said, she is consistent. She is consistent. And I think that if more people could realize that it's your consistent behavior that makes people trust you, that really is what it takes. And it sounds so simple, but people have such a hard time being consistent, especially when something negative is happening. What happens is they turn into an emotional basket case and just lash out at everybody. When in reality, like you have somebody like Warren, who that isn't what she did. She met moments in different ways. I'm not saying she's like a robot, but she was at the end of it, or even during it, she was still consistent in that what I care about is you. What I care about is this mission. And that doesn't change regardless of the situation. Where what I've seen live a lot of times is, oh, this negative thing happened. I don't care about you or your feelings. I just care about how this is going to make me look. And it's like, okay, very different approach, right? That then even just in a moment like that, it's like, think about the psychological safety, think about the trust, think about all those things that you have to rebuild because you were so worried about what something looked like. And now you've also lost the loyalty of those people who would have rushed to help you had you just been able to be consistent with your feelings.
Yeah. I don't like the optic of how this is coming off for me. I don't know, but that's neither here nor there, I guess. No, that's I think that consistency in responding to issues, both positive and negative, or hard or easy, yeah, that's something. I think that's probably one of the hardest things to do because you don't always get hopefully, you don't get enough opportunities to respond to bad things to be consistent. You know what I mean? Like for it to become muscle memory. So I could definitely see where that takes a lot of discipline and self-awareness. And yeah, I never really kind of thought about it in that way. But yeah, being consistent in hard times should be hard because you shouldn't hopefully be running into them too often. Yeah. Wow.
And I think it's also like when you bring that up too, I think it's also interesting what people view as something difficult. Because I've seen people in leadership positions, so leaders, fall apart over literally something being changed on a calendar. And that is nothing.
Yeah, but
That
they
is
had a lot of other stuff going on, Natasha. Okay, they had a lot of other stuff.
I like that you're a toxic leader supporter. But it's so interesting though, because it really does make, people just need to consider when I do this or when I did this, is that what impact did that have? And just because I'm the leader, yeah, people still have to report to me. They still have to do different things, but it kind of goes back to that whole concept of leadership versus likership. And so sometimes people they just over index and they're too nice and they just want people to like them. And people liking you is helpful. It does help get things done. But a better way to do that is through this consistency. I'm here to take care of you. I'm here to support you. And in return, people will support you. That's how Roberta has, she's going east and she doesn't know why. She can't explain the visions in her head. She can't explain what this mission is. But because of that consistency through all those different times, people are like, we're going with her. And so it doesn't matter what the situation is, they're going to be loyal. And people are like that. Did you have anything else from this episode?
No.
Yeah. I like that we're now the last season, we had a lot of just different challenges, some things that we saw in the leaders and in the characters and in the team. And now I really feel like we're in this new place of let's figure out a new way to move forward together. And I think that that's what makes this season really interesting. So I'm excited to continue to chat about it.
Definitely.